We look at an updated list of pass rushers that the Baltimore Ravens could sign after Jadeveon Clowney signs with the Carolina Panthers. All that and more come up next on this bonus episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here and making this bonus episode of Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms, so in video form on YouTube, also audio form wherever you get your shows. You can like this video, subscribe to the channel, follow along in audio form, the whole 9 yards for daily Ravens content 5 days per week. Plus, we do these bonus episodes. We do live shows as well. So be sure to, again, subscribe and follow along. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with anybody who follows the bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I wanted to do a bonus episode just to kind of talk about, we didn't really talk. Everything was so scrambling over the course of this week, especially everything going on with just the city of Baltimore. Obviously, the Francis Scott Key Bridge tragedy, which, again, my condolences to everybody involved there. Also, the Orioles opening day. It's been a lot for the city of Baltimore, but kind of in the midst, the big Ravens news of the week was Jadeveon Clowney goes and signs with the Carolina Panthers, and that kind of throws a wrench a little bit into what I thought Baltimore's offseason plans were going to be. So today I wanted to get on here and kind of talk about who's still available. It's not necessarily a super inspiring list, but I think we should talk about it anyway. It's important to talk about these kinds of things. So with Clowney off the board and with honestly a lot of other really quality pass rushers too, where can the Ravens add somebody? And can they even add anybody? What would be the inspiring route to go? Are we inspired by the edge group as a whole? We can talk about that too. Also, a big NFL piece of news dropped on Friday as the Philadelphia Eagles traded Hassan Reddick over to the New York Jets. And we're going to talk about if the Ravens should have made that deal. And also talk a bit about if we're worried or inspired by not only the edge position for Baltimore right now as it stands, but also just some other positions as well. So a jam-packed bonus episode of Locked On Ravens here. Let's first get into this list of pass rushers and just seeing where the Ravens could maybe add, who would fit. Now, let's just first go over the list as a whole. So I'm going to read off the top free agent pass rushers available for the Ravens to sign right now. Kyle Van Noy, Emmanuel Ogbah, Carl Lawson, Randy Gregory, Tyus Bowser, Jerry Hughes, Justin Houston, Bud Dupree, Shaq Lawson, Marcus Golden, Anthony Barr, Bruce Irvin. Those are some of the names. Now, again, as I said a couple minutes ago, not very inspiring. I think the only one that would move a needle for me is the guy we're all the most familiar with off of 2023 in Baltimore, and that is Kyle Van Noy, a player that I think really fit into Baltimore last year, had those 9+ sacks, and he was a player that not only provided them that pass rushing presence, but I was really impressed with him also working in the run game and just he seemed like he was a clutch player. I guess his clutchness is the word I'll use. But he just seemed to be in the right spot at the right time for the most part, making big plays. Now, he's a player that at this point is going to cost more than, he's making less than $5 million. I think honestly less than $3 million last year. Going to be a pretty significant pay raise, much like we saw with Jadeveon Clowney, who goes to Carolina, gets a 2-year, $20 million deal. That actually ends up being up to worth 24. So he's getting a big payday in Carolina. Van Noy also was going to get a big payday, but I do think, and I had this thought process the entire way, I thought that Van Noy was always going to cost less than Clowney did. Now, I didn't expect Clowney to get $10 million per season. I expected him to fall more in the $6 to $8 million per year range. Good for Clowney, though, getting $10 million, being able to be closer to home. But I always thought Van Noy would maybe fall into the $5 to $7 million range, and that I think is something where at $10 million per season, the Ravens were never going to really be in on that, right? But I think at 5 to 7, if Van Noy falls around that price, it's a no-brainer personally for me. Van Noy still has a lot of intangibles, and he's still someone that can contribute to you in a really big way. And plus, I mean, what other guy on this list is necessarily inspiring you the way that Van Noy does? I mean, I've been a big Ugba fan for a while, but his tenure in Miami didn't really work out so well. Carl Lawson in Cincinnati was awesome, but his Jets tenure wasn't great. Randy Gregory's kind of bounced around, after his Cowboys career, Denver, San Francisco. We know about Bowser. He's not coming back. Jerry Hughes, it doesn't inspire me. Justin Houston, Justin Houston's a Locked On Ravens legend. If you've been with me every day, if you're an everydayer, you know the Justin Houston Locked On Ravens lore. Huge Justin Houston guy, but at this point in his career, it's not what the Ravens were looking for right now. And this is another thing too. Baltimore, and speaking of like a guy of the ilk of Justin Houston, I think part of the reason the Ravens decided to kind of make the shift away from a Justin Houston type and move on to a Clowney, move on to a Van Noy last year was because with Houston, you were trying to manage his snaps. The Ravens don't want to bring in, I don't think, this, really old, they bring a veteran, right? But necessarily like a mid-30s guy or getting up there in age and his snaps need to be managed. They don't want to do that. They want to have guys that I believe are willing to play all three downs, can play all three downs, or at least two of the three. You don't have to necessarily manage snaps during the season. So a Houston would fall into that category. Bruce Irvin probably falls into that category. Some of these players, maybe Bud Dupree falls into that category too. There are a couple of guys, but I think we're seeing Baltimore wanting to shift more into that physical defense. And I said this last offseason, you move from Marcus Peters to Rock Ya-Sin. I know that Ya-Sin, it didn't work out, but Ya-Sin is a much more physical player than Marcus Peters is. Justin Houston, Jadeveon Clowney, and Kyle Van Noy. Both those guys are much more physical players. Baltimore wants to play a physical brand of defense. So who out of these guys are physical players? I mean, I'm not saying that Houston just isn't physical whatsoever, but he's more of a finesse guy, third down pass rushing specialist. Baltimore wants players on this roster that can play on early downs and stop the run, can play on second down and be kind of a hybrid. And then in obvious passing situations, you can also have them on the field if need be. Baltimore has rotations, right? They're going to rotate in guys. I mean, Adafe Owe, David Ajabo, et cetera, Tavius Robinson. But look, I'd be remiss if I said that this group necessarily inspired me. At this point, it pretty clearly is Kyle Van Noy or bust. And that's a little scary. It's a little scary in my opinion. I'm not saying to completely panic. I'm not saying that whatsoever. We saw Baltimore address this position and do it really well over the course of last offseason, waiting until the last 3 weeks of the offseason, waiting until in the season, 3 weeks into the year, they signed Kyle Van Noy. Baltimore does like to take their time with this whole thing, but at the same time, I do think it's a weaker edge class than last year. While Baltimore's done a really good job at those reclamation projects, Clowney and Van Noy being two of them, I do think that with Clowney, he's a better player. That, him and Van Noy were kind of in the same tier for me. Those two are better players than everybody else on this list, and it's not necessarily super close. Plus, you have to kind of factor in some of the injury history. I mean, the reason the Ravens moved on from Tyus Bowser was because, the injury history was kind of weird. We didn't really know what was going on with his knee and everything that happened in that situation. And some of these players on this list have had pretty serious injuries. I mean, Carl Lawson, his Jets tenure is kind of ruined by an injury. So what is he going to be like? It's a very specific type of player Baltimore's looking for. And I'm not saying that they can't have success waiting, but we can be honest, where if the Ravens don't sign Kyle Van Noy here, it's like, where else are they going to go? Are we inspired if they go and sign a Jerry Hughes or a Bud Dupree or an Ugba or one of those players to rush on the edge? Now, of course, free agency is not the only avenue that the Ravens could explore here. There's the draft, and you have guys like Chop Robinson and other players as well. We're definitely going to be talking about the edge position on our mock draft Monday. I think at this point you kind of have to. We've done a lot of offensive line work, but that's the other thing too, where the edge position is not the only need for the Ravens right now. They have a lot of them. So talk about offensive line, talk about edge, corner. You could argue wide receiver. You could argue a couple other positions like third safety, some of those other areas. Baltimore's in a situation with their cap where, again, they're not handicapped to the point where they can't sign anybody anymore. But with Lamar, some of these other big extensions coming in, it changes how things work. It doesn't mean they can't do anything, but at the same time, they're going to have to figure things out, and that's why they couldn't be in on a guy like Jadeveon Clowney. I saw somebody actually in the comments of the list I put out. They said trade for Matthew Judon. I don't think it's necessarily going to happen, but in my opinion, that could be a guy for next year, but we're talking about this year. And I think for me, the big thing as well as Darius Smith signs and Leonard Floyd signs and all these other guys sign, the edge market has been decently lucrative for the most part, but I wish I'm not saying there wasn't a plan because they've lost so many guys. I just think it's been so hectic, but a group of Odafe Owe and David Ajabo and Tavius Robinson and Malik Ham, again, I'm not saying to panic, not saying to do that, but look, I don't blame you if you're not inspired right now and you're saying, well, where are they going to go? It's tough. And the updated list of guys who are available, sure, the Ravens could turn some of those guys around. I mean, again, we saw it with Clowney and Van Noy, but it's a tad worrying. But look, I'm nowhere close to panicking. Eric DeCosta has proven he knows what he's doing. We're going to see how it plays out. We are, again, less than 3 weeks into free agency. We got a long way to go, right? But again, the edge rusher market kind of dried up quickly. We're going to see how the Ravens maneuver it. And coming up in the second part of the show, we're going to be talking a bit about the Hassan Reddick trade from the Eagles to the Jets and if the Ravens should have made that deal. Stay tuned. Plenty to talk about on Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. My bracket is pretty much all but busted right now. UConn's still in it, but obviously Houston out, Gonzaga out. It's been a rough couple of days bracket-wise for me. But just as a FanDuel.com/locked on, I bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. We're back for our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here on this Saturday, a bonus episode of the show. Really appreciate everybody for being here and making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day. Hopefully everybody's weekend has gotten off to a smooth start. The Orioles playing both today and tomorrow, so some baseball in the area. Still a long way to go until Ravens football, but actually we're under a month from the draft, which is kind of crazy to think about. It's kind of snuck up on us. Free agency, Ravens have lost a lot of players, not necessarily added a ton. We'll get into what their free agency has looked like, maybe a little bit in this segment, but more so in the last part of the show. But again, free agency is not the only place the Ravens can make an addition or add somebody. There is the draft, but there are also trades. And we saw a trade yesterday, and it relates to the pass rushing department. Hassan Reddick, the really, really quality edge rusher, now formerly the Philadelphia Eagles, he gets traded to the New York Jets, who I think are having a heck of an offseason, by the way. But the Eagles trade Reddick to the Jets for a conditional 2026 third-round pick. That could be a second. And now the conditions on that pick that would make it a third to a second, what those are, it's if Reddick plays 65.7% of play time this season and has 10 or more sacks. If not, that's a 2023 third-round pick. So I think he is going to play in more than 67.5% of snaps this season. 10 sacks, I think, for him, the way he's played, is definitely achievable. So if you're Eric DeCosta, if you're the Ravens, are you making that deal for Hassan Reddick? And this is something we'll probably talk a little bit about more so over the course of the next week, just about what type of deal the Ravens should be looking for. But we do have a theme this offseason a little bit of teams trading conditional picks, but not this year. And obviously, when it comes to conditions, you have to have those conditions convey on the field. So obviously, there are no football games, so it doesn't necessarily matter. You can't trade a conditional pick in 2024 because you got to have conditions to actually go off of. But the conditional pick thing, we saw L'Jarius Sneed get traded from the Chiefs to the Titans for a conditional pick in 2023, I believe, or in 2025, I believe it was. And I don't remember if that pick was conditional or not, but we're starting to see these conditional picks be traded. And I think this might be a new trend where we start to see this a little bit more. Now, this isn't even for next year. This is a pick 2 years down the line, which I think is really interesting, trading future picks. And we see that in blockbuster deals, right? A team will trade a couple of firsts, and then maybe there'll be another pick down the line that's a mid or late round pick. But this is a really quality edge rusher for, I guess you can say, quote unquote, just a 2026 third round pick. And some of the risk in doing that, if you're the Jets, you don't really know where your team is going to be in 2026. And if that pick conveys, it's kind of two separate things, where if Reddick plays this season and plays at 67.5% and has 10 or more sacks, that pick conveys. But if you're terrible in 2025, doesn't matter what Reddick does even if he's gone in 2025 because he doesn't have a new contract. But I guess the risk you run is if he leaves, you get a conditional, well, not, I guess not conditional, but a compensatory pick anyway. And the deal that he would sign, the Jets would probably be in line for a third. So you're essentially, worst case scenario, losing him, and then you're moving back around if that pick does become a second rounder. I would have been fine with the Ravens doing this, but here's the thing. It's the contract. And could the Ravens have afforded to pay Hassan Reddick that contract? When the Ravens traded a second-round pick for Roquan Smith, which I think everybody at the time was pretty shocked by because it's, oh, wow, Eric DeCosta, wouldn't expect him. Look, I don't expect a first-round pick to ever be traded in the Eric DeCosta tenure. But even a second-round pick was kind of like, whoa, like for Roquan. And look, worth it, by the way. Like 1,000% would have done that trade 10 times out of 10. But people are kind of like, that's a big thing. That's a big deal for Eric DeCosta to trade a second-round pick. And again, if Roquan had left, they would have gotten a third-round comp pick, and I guess they only moved back around as kind of a trial period to see if he would fit. But we know how much Eric DeCosta values the draft. But to me, I mean, I probably would have made this deal and then just tried to find a way to make it work. But if you can't afford the contract of the guy, even if it's just for this season, though, this is the Ravens window right here. And if you lose him, it'd be a big loss. But to me, you're trying to win now, right? You're not trying to look a couple years down the line. The game that Eric Costa and all these GMs have to play, though, is it's not just for next season. You have to look 2 years down the line, 5 years down the line, because if you go all in 1 year and then everything crumbles around you and you don't get it done, then you're kind of in a world of hurt. The thing is, the Ravens, yeah, you know what? They went all in terms of signing some guys last offseason and structuring some things, void years with Odell and this, that, and the other, and some void years on different contracts. Didn't work out. But they didn't necessarily handicap in a situation where that was it and they were done. As long as you have Lamar, you have a shot. But we do know pass rush, the edge position, is a dire need for them. And Hassan Reddick would have been the Ravens' number one pass rusher, would have leaped it off away on the depth chart. Better option than Jadeveon Clowney and Calvin Neuer for them last year. Those two were good. So let's say the player Reddick is. Just for context, I'm going to pull up his stats really quickly, actually. For me, I think Reddick is someone that, look, I liked him before he went to Carolina. I was really circling because he was kind of on the outs. People were like, is this guy really going to be a quality pass rusher? Hadn't really put it all together. Had 12 and a half sacks in his last year in Arizona after a really rough first 3 years, but had 11 sacks in Carolina, 11 sacks in Carolina in 2021. Then went to Philadelphia, had 16 sacks in 2022, was a Pro Bowler, and also 11 sacks last year, another Pro Bowl nod. So he's had 4 straight years of at least double-digit sacks, and that's a big deal. I think trading conditional 2026 third, I would have made that deal because, one, it's a position of need. And two, at this point, who else in free agency are you going to sign to a big deal, right? Reddick is somebody that I think could have made an impact for you. If you can't sign him to the deal, you lose him. You get a 2025 compensatory pick, or I guess 2026 compensatory pick because he leaves. And that's going to be a third rounder based off the contract he signed. So, look, the Ravens still have room to add to their pass rushing room. I'm not sure if Baltimore was involved in the discussions for Reddick. It's a little disappointing, I guess. But I'm not panicking right now because Baltimore does have time. But it's rare a pass rusher like Reddick is available at this point. Now, maybe another guy will be made available and the Ravens can make a move then. Again, we have so much time left that we're going to maybe see a name that we're not expecting to be on the trade block right now. Maybe the Patriots do make Matthew Judon available on a contract year and Baltimore makes that move. Now, his contract, again, you got to work that into the cap, and I don't know if they can. But at this point, my verdict is I probably would have made that deal for Hassan Reddick, but I'm not the GM. I don't run the team. So we're going to see what Eric DeCosta has up his sleeve there. Coming up, though, we are going to be talking about worried or inspired. Do a little bit of a segment there talking about are we worried or inspired about some of the positional groups on the Ravens right now, plus going over their offseason in a little bit more detail. Stay tuned. We're going to talk about on Locked On Ravens. We're back. Our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Ostreicher still talking with you here, Saturday style. Thank you again for tuning in with me today and making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every single day. Free and available, of course. So it's all free. No money involved here on Locked On Ravens. You can subscribe, follow along in video form and audio form for free. Plus, it's the same show, both in audio and video. So if you want to listen one day, watch another day, we had you covered. You're not missing out on any content there. Well, let's now talk about the Ravens and kind of what their offseason has been. So let's first dive into a general perspective on what Baltimore's offseason has been. So here's an updated look at Baltimore's 2024 free agency. Their additions: Derrick Henry, Chris Board, Josh Jones, Kadar Hallman. Those have been their additions so far. Their losses: Gus Edwards, Geno Stone, Devin Duvernay, Ronald Darby, John Simpson, Delshon Phillips, Tyler Ott, Patrick Queen, Tyus Bowser, who was cut, Morgan Moses, who was traded, Tyler Huntley, Kevin Zeitler, and Jadeveon Clowney. Now, that's a lot of losses, but they also did re-sign some players: Nelson Aguilar, Justin Madubuike, Blake Harrison, Ardarius Washington, Brent Urban, Josh Johnson, Arthur Millette, and they, of course, also restructured Ronnie Stanley. So, I mean, in terms of that, I don't say this. I really don't say this to be like, oh, Baltimore's so terrible and, they're an awful team. They're not. But objectively, you look at those additions, you look at those subtractions, the guys who they re-signed, it's great, but I'm only focusing on additions and subtractions. Baltimore right now, their roster is a worse roster than it was in 2023. Again, that's not me trying to say Baltimore's a bad team, but you objectively look at who they have gained and who they have lost. They have lost more than they have gained. I love the Derrick Henry addition. I think Chris Board and Josh Jones are fine, but you look at that list of losses, and at this point, look, Baltimore's going to add more players. I don't doubt that they will do that, but at this point, Baltimore is a worse team, but teams go through that. They go through ups and downs of off seasons. But at this point, we know Baltimore's not going to be big spenders. They're not really big spenders during free agency. They love the draft. They love bringing guys in that way, maybe a surprise trade here or there. So as I've said all show, and I mean it, plenty of time, but we're going to see how it all works out. So are you, based off of the offseason Baltimore's had, you can comment down below on YouTube. You can at me on Twitter. You can message me, whatever. Do you feel worried or inspired by Baltimore's offseason? I think it's hard for me to use either one of those words because I don't necessarily feel inspired by Baltimore's offseason so far, but I'm also not worried about them or panicking about them right now. Teams just do things differently. Every team does things differently. And when you talk about the excitement, yeah, it's super exciting when a team goes out there and signs a bunch of guys, a bunch of new faces, and kind of rebuilds a roster. Baltimore's going to have to bring in vets, but we saw additions like Ronald Darby and Rock Yassin. Odell was a guy who was pretty much right before the draft or a little before then. But then again, we've talked about Clowney and Van Noy, those guys signing right before the year or during the season. We're going to see how the Ravens end up doing it. But in terms of worried or inspired, running back wise, I feel inspired by that position. I mean, that's a position where one of Baltimore's greatest strengths right now is the running back position. Derrick Henry, Justice Hill, Keaton Mitchell, those three, and I think they're also going to add another back in the draft, probably a mid-round guy. But all three of those guys on the roster right now, Henry, Mitchell, and Hill, super talented. Mitchell's going to come back when he comes back. We don't know when that's going to be, but in my opinion, yeah, I'm inspired by that group. Wide receiver, I'd say I'm inspired, but also a little worried. I mean, it's different because Zay obviously showed that he has a ton of potential. Nelson Aguilar was awesome for them last year. But outside of that, Rashad Bateman, who has shown flashes, still a little bit unproven in terms of what he's going to be. And if the Ravens ask going to be a second wide receiver for him this year, it's going to be an interesting year. I think Bateman has it in him. But again, he has to prove it. And then Tylan Wallace not going to be a piece. I mean, maybe he will be, but I don't expect he shouldn't be. But I don't expect him to be either. So do you bring in a Michael Gallup and do you draft a guy? Is it a Keon Coleman? Is it an Eli Mitchell? Or do you wait till the second round like a Jalen Polk or someone like that? I don't know what it's going to be. I'm inspired because of Zay and the potential Rashad Bateman has, but I'm also a little worried just because, like, what's the direction of that room? If they truly try to go young, like we talked about on yesterday's show with Rocco DeSangro, we're going to see how it plays out. Tight end, inspired. And obviously quarterback, too, with Lamar, I'm inspired there, too. But tight end, Andrews, Likely, Kohler, inspired. Offensive line, definitely a little bit of a worry for me. I mean, it's difficult to replace three starters, and Baltimore can draft a plug-and-play tackle in the first round if they want to, but again, you're missing out on a guy in Kevin Zeitler, who's a really talented player, and John Simpson, who, again, was better than I thought, but the Ravens could, that's fine. The Morgan Moses was a great pass protector for him, really solid, steady guy. So it's a little worrying to see them have to replace 3 starters. Definitely kind of needed in a way, but I would have liked to see at least Zeitler retain there. Defensive line, I'm inspired by that group. One of the strengths, honestly, my favorite position, and it has been for a couple years now, is the defensive line. Matabike, Travis Jones, Broderick Washington, Michael Pierce, Brent Urban. As solid as you can get there. Really steady flow of both young guys and veterans. I love that group. Edge, we've talked about it. I'm worried there for sure, but I'm not panicking. I'm worried, but I'm not panicking. There's a difference between, being like, oh, okay, I don't really know how this is going to go. Guys are flying off the board. What are they going to do? Versus, oh, there's nothing they can do. It's over. Season's done. Not panicking. just want to make that clear. Inside linebacker, I mean, I'm inspired, a little interested to see how Trenton Simpson performs in a full season role with Patrick Queen not there. But Roquan is that dude. And the Ravens also have, and speaking of edge, by the way, I forgot to mention this. Both Malik Harrison and Trenton Simpson can play edge. Now, Simpson, I don't expect to play nearly as much there because he's going to be taking over for Patrick Queen unless something crazy happens. But I think they might try to play Malik Harrison there. They re-signed him. They might try to play him there a bit this year. That he was the backup Sam to Tyus Bowser when Tyus Bowser was healthy. We're going to see how that plays out. But still, I think inside linebacker, I'd lead more towards inspired for that. Corner, both. They need to replace Ronald Darby. The nickel position, I'm inspired for sure. In terms of Arthur Milletto, Darius Washington, and Pepe Williams. But outside, Marlon, Brandon Stevens, and I guess it's Jalen Armour Davis right now. You need a third guy. Armour Davis has not done much to inspire confidence in me right now. So got to add a guy there. But Stevens was awesome. Humphrey, I think, without injuries, he'll hopefully be back to form, or at least full form. Safety, it's inspired. Even though they need a third safety with Geno departing, Marcus Williams, and Kyle Hamilton, it's enough to be inspired. They're going to add a third safety. I'm totally fine with that. And special teams, 100% inspired. You got Justin Tucker, greatest of all time there, Jordan Stout, and Nick Moore, who's going to come back from his injury and be awesome for him. So Baltimore's roster is still good. They're still a good roster, still going to be in contention for a Super Bowl next season. They're still going to add to their team. But they have endured a lot of losses. It's going to be a different team next season. We're going to see how it plays out for them, especially, like we talked about all episode today, at the edge position. That's all I have for you here today, though, on Locked on Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in to this bonus episode of the show. Be sure to subscribe and follow along for more daily Ravens content. We're also coming back with a bonus episode tomorrow as well. We're talking about the rules and how they could either impact the Ravens both in a positive or negative light. Stay tuned. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked on Ravens.